I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off for us today. Um, First of all, thank you so much for joining, being on the line with us. I know it's a busy week for folks. So no worries if you jump in a couple minutes late or your colleagues jump in a couple minutes late. We are recording this event and we will be sharing it with all registrants. So welcome to Let's Talk Marketing Pro Bono, a Taproot Foundation webinar. I'm so excited to share information about our nonprofit and how our business pro bono programs may be able to help your organizations build capacity to do even more great work, especially in the areas of marketing and communications. During this time when we nonprofits are being really stretched and challenged and leaned on to do even more, it's important that you all feel empowered and fully resourced and ready to rise up to meet these community needs. So Taproot is excited to get to know each of your organizations better and hopefully partner with you moving forward. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of an introduction to myself. My name is Kimberly Swartz, she, her, hers, and I'm the Senior Manager of Community Engagement here at Taproot Foundation. I have this wonderful job of getting nonprofits and business professionals engaged in Taproot's programs. So bringing people together for volunteer work that leads to community connectiveness and deeper impact felt by all. So I'm also a nonprofit professional who, like many of you, are struggling with a to-do list that really never seems to get shorter. And the challenge of making the most of a really tight budget and tight team bandwidth. So I'll touch on my own personal experiences using pro bono support to fuel Taproot's efforts, as well as volunteering my own skills to other organizations as a marketing pro bono consultant as we go through today's presentation. I'm joined by my Taproot colleagues, Samina Usmani and Megan Gillette, who will be covering the chat box during today's presentation. So a few logistics notes on that end. All attendees will be muted throughout today's event, but please ask questions or make comments in that chat box. We'll be handling questions throughout, or Samina and Megan will direct them to me to be answered during our Q&A time at the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, this event is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants later this afternoon. And as I continue introducing Taproot Foundation and what we're talking about during today's event, I would love if you could introduce yourself and the organization you work for in the chat. I know many of you have already been doing a great job of that already. I see Mackenzie shouting out, trying to find connections in the Atlanta area. Please continue those intros. We love to get to know you and your organization's mission. And feel free to exchange LinkedIn profiles as well. Why not get some networking going? This may be a virtual event, but we can still help make some of those connections. All right, so before I dive into the agenda for today's webinar, I do want to share a little more information about what we do here at Taproot, especially since there's a good amount of folks on the line who are newcomers to our nonprofit's work. So the Taproot Foundation drives social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Since the early 2000s, Taproot has partnered with nearly 10,000 social change organizations and over 24,000 volunteers, totaling around $260 million in donated professional services. In addition to Taproot's pro bono programs and the CSR consultancy work we do, we also lead up a global pro bono network and are really committed to advancing this civic engagement, this volunteerism movement through further research and education and events. So during this event specifically, Let's Talk Pro Bono, or Let's Talk Marketing Pro Bono, we're going to cover an introduction to pro bono, this phrase I keep using, and how it can apply to your marketing needs. And we're going to walk through some examples of marketing and communications challenges, common challenges that are faced by nonprofits and how they could be addressed by working with volunteers. And then we're going to be joined by an incredible longtime Taproot volunteer, Samantha O'Neill, which we're so grateful to have on the line with us today. And we'll be having a conversation with her on her experience coming in and working with nonprofits to tackle marketing and communications challenges. And she'll be sharing some insights on what nonprofits have done really well to set her up for success in those partnerships, and maybe some things she wish had happened that could have made things run a little bit smoother. And then stick around to the end of the event, because we will walk through how to connect with marketing support through Taproot's online programs. And we will save room at the end for Q&A, question and answer. So as we go, again, direct those questions into that chat box for me. All right, I'm going to get things rolling by calling out the elephant in the room. The past 2 years have been incredibly difficult for nonprofits. Organizations have dealt with seesawing levels of community demand for services, a lack of in-person volunteer support, major shifts in fundraising, a complete change in how our teams work and collaborate together, and a very, very crowded digital communications and marketing space. So I just want to name that challenge that we're all confronted with, because breaking through the noise has seemingly become even more difficult for social change organizations like ours. Marketing and comms has long been one of the most requested areas of volunteer support that Taproot provides. And the past 2 years has really underlined this need even further, with marketing and communications being the top reported capacity need in a wide-scale nonprofit survey that Taproot conducted in the latter half of 2020, with 66% of our respondents indicating a need for marketing and communications support in the next 12 months in order to continue meeting their community's needs. And let us know in the chat if you and your social change organization fall into the 66%. I promise that you are not alone. And as someone who formerly sat on Taproot's marketing and communications team myself, I can personally raise my hand as falling into this group. It has been a challenging couple of years. So I want to make sure we name that. Yeah, I see folks in the chat chiming in to say the same. So we dug a little deeper into the specific aspects of marketing and communications that were causing challenges for our nonprofit partners. And we found that around a third of respondents reported experiencing brand awareness issues due to the pandemic. Just over a third indicated stakeholder communications challenges. It was difficult for them to even reach their volunteer partners or their program participants or potential sponsors. We also know that right around a third of respondents reported a need for graphic design support specifically. And so I should mention here that Taproot survey incorporated insights from nonprofits across issue areas and budget and staff sizes. So we know that the strain for resources is truly being felt by social change organizations across the board, although it might be impacting us in slightly different ways. And if anybody has questions on this survey data or wants to see more of that, I believe my colleague Samina can go ahead and drop a link to those survey key takeaways in the chat for download. But as she's doing that, I would be curious to hear from folks on the line, which of these areas your nonprofit is most interested in seeing if volunteer support could be an answer over the next 12 months. We've mentioned branding, we've mentioned graphic design, social media, communications, as well as just overall marketing strategy and planning support. So please go ahead and drop what you're feeling in the chat. I see a good amount of social media, brand awareness being a big one as well. Yeah, communications, product marketing, definitely. So we'll try and cover some examples and tailored recommendations to those topics that people are really feeling a good amount of pain points in. Yeah, okay. So as you're doing that, I do want to backtrack just a little bit to talk about Taproot in a greater detail and kind of this mission, why we were founded and why we're doing what we're doing. Our nonprofit kind of kicked things off in 2001 with this knowledge that there's a massive resource gap present in the social sector, right? So we have organizations like folks on the line who may very well have the solutions to our world's most pressing social challenges, but they simply don't have the financial means to carry out those missions to the fullest extent. Organizations are unable to invest in the infrastructure at the same rate as for-profit entities do, which means that we're missing out on staff development or hiring opportunities, making do without entire departments like a marketing team, or cutting costs by continuing to delay key capacity building investments like a CRM upgrade or a website redesign. And when these capacity building investments are put on pause, our nonprofit's bottom line suffer, our bottom line being our mission. So to put it simply, most organizations tackling social problems don't have full access to the resources, funding, or staff expertise needed to fully accomplish those vital missions. This lack of ability to invest in ourselves saps the development of strong and resilient and sustainable organizations to the detriment of the community members that we're seeking to serve. And due to current global crises, charitable organizations are feeling this strain more than ever. And this is where Pro Bono comes in. This is where Taproot can help. Taproot Foundation bridges the nonprofit resource gap through connections with skilled volunteers who provide their tech, their marketing, their HR, their data, their strategy, or their finance experience pro bono. Now, oftentimes when people hear the word pro bono, the phrase pro bono, their minds automatically go to legal. That's totally fine, totally understandable. But it actually spans many, many other business professions as well. Taproot Foundation actually focuses our programs in the broad areas of marketing and communications, finance, strategy, IT, technology, HR, data, and operations. And as we talk about pro bono in today's event, we'll equate it to making use of the talented, skilled volunteers who are sharing their business experience with your organization. And I already saw a few people in the chat chiming in that they're a volunteer themselves. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please feel free to highlight yourself again, share your LinkedIn, and we thank you so much for your volunteerism. And as you do that, I do want to jump into some specifics. So let's talk about how pro bono, how work with skilled marketing and communications volunteers could play out at your organization. Here on the slide, I've outlined different ways volunteers can assist with elements that feed into the development of a marketing plan. A marketing plan being your organization's outline of the year's marketing strategy that includes concrete objectives and actions that you're taking and the metrics or goals that you're hoping to hit. And I'm starting here because I do want to give you something concrete to link pro bono examples back to, so you can envision in your mind, what pro bono, the impact it could really make on your organization. And a marketing plan is truly a great foundational piece that will help you direct and streamline and track the success of your marketing and communications efforts, really making sure that all the wheels are moving in the same direction all at once. So you'll see here on the slide that there are obviously many ways that volunteers with backgrounds in traditional marketing, digital marketing, communications, and technology could be huge assets to your team and the creation of a wide-reaching marketing plan. Things mentioned here include the creation of key messages, which is kind of like an elevator pitch for your organization, creating a new logo, updating your website, leaning into search engine optimization, creating a communications plan for an upcoming campaign or event or new programmatic piece that you're launching. Those are all really great examples of work that you can tackle in bite-sized chunks with skilled volunteers. But I'd also encourage folks on the line to think more broadly about what building the long-term capacity of your team's marketing efforts could look like. Because when we widen that lens, we'll find that professionals from the HR, the strategy, and the data fields can actually be huge assets to your organization when you're in this marketing and planning and marketing strategy space. So I want to explain why a little bit further. If we're thinking about human resources knowledge and how that's going to apply to your nonprofit's marketing needs, I would pose some questions to you. Are you planning on building out your marketing team in the next year? What will that look like? Is it going to mean the addition of full-time staff members, paid contractors, a volunteer marketing committee, maybe additional pro bono resources from places like Taproot or beyond, or even a board member role who's focused on marketing? Volunteers' HR skills can actually help you create recruitment plans to bring those folks in, and or policies or onboarding materials to immediately get people up to speed and on the same page about procedures when it comes to, hey, what are our social media policies? Or what's the knowledge that I need to know before I write a blog for you? Are there any guidelines I need to keep in mind? You could also leverage HR talent to create a professional development or learning plan for current marketing staff members, or current staff members who maybe are managing marketing on top of 10 other hats they're also wearing at your organization. So what does that growth plan look like for that particular staff member to help retain and advance the existing talent that's already on your team? Moving into the data bucket, nonprofits are scrappy. I don't need to tell you. I know all of you on the line you're making the most out of your budgets and your staff availability, which means that you need to be really certain and crystal clear that you're getting the highest return on investment out of your marketing campaigns, your marketing efforts, and the programs attached to them. And that's where data and analytics skills can come in and make a huge long-term impact on your organization, both in marketing and beyond. So the pro bono opportunities listed here under the data bucket include getting a nonprofit to the point where they can effectively track results of their marketing efforts, campaigns, and use that data to refine future efforts. So things like creating a web traffic dashboard and using Google Analytics, for example, setting KPIs, key performance indicators that you're hoping to hit through your annual marketing plan goals. That could include things from social media, web traffic numbers, program conversions, how many people are signing up for a program and heard about it through your website. It could also include training on how to use these analytics tools going forward, right? So once a volunteer sets something up for you, how is your team going to continue using it in the future? So think about that training and implementation piece as well. And then in the strategy bucket, strategy skills are hugely relevant to nonprofits who are in the planning and goal setting stages of their marketing efforts. So this is a great time of year to really be focusing on these deep strategic questions. So a few project examples listed on the slide here include conducting a competitor and collaborator analysis. So looking at who is in your field, in your space, whether it's geographically or in the same issue area, or maybe in a complementary issue area. They're doing similar work to you, serving community members, but perhaps there's opportunity for you to team up and run programs or run events together. So that analysis is a great piece to have in hand when creating partnership strategies, marketing strategies. Same with stakeholder research. This is another really foundational piece that's going to allow you to better craft and develop communications and messaging and materials, events going forward. The more you understand your stakeholders, your volunteer, your community participants, your sponsors, the better you're going to be able to target the things that your marketing team members are creating for those stakeholders. And then a few other examples here would be conducting a SWOT analysis, What are you doing really well? What maybe is an opportunity for you to do even better in the year ahead as it pertains to your marketing and communications, as well as project management advice or experience. So at this point, you may be wondering, okay, well, my organization is feeling capacity constraints in a lot of these areas, but how could using Pro Bono actually play out for my team? So I want to dive into that. I want to make sure I get specific for you all here. So Taproot Foundation, in our 20 plus years of facilitating pro bono projects, we've noticed that there are certain qualities that all successful pro bono engagements share. And we've taken these qualities and we've turned them into 4 simple screening tests that you can use to evaluate every need you might have on your wish list for a potential pro bono opportunity, for a really great opportunity to bring in an external volunteer to knock out for you. So the first screening test on our list is around scope. How big is the need and how well defined is the end outcome that you're putting out there or that you want to walk away from the project with? And this isn't to say that you can't complete big projects using volunteer support. Taproot has seen nonprofits get entire websites built out pro bono. It just means that you have to have a very specific outcome or goal in mind, and you have to be comfortable with breaking big projects up into smaller, more well-defined chunks that make use of a single volunteer skill set at a time. So those nonprofits who we've seen create entire websites, that's actually been a series of multiple projects where at the end they have this beautiful, well-designed website, but it may have taken 5 or 6 projects to get to that point, right? So think to yourself, is this a manageable project? Will I be able, do I have the right experience, knowledge, materials ready to transfer over to a volunteer to tackle this whole thing at once? Or do I actually need to break this up and knock it out into different pieces instead? So narrow that scope and you'll make it more likely for a volunteer to be able to complete it successfully and on a good timeline. And that note actually leads me to my next point, which is around urgency. So if your nonprofit's need is urgent, meaning very bad things will happen directly as a result of this project not taking place successfully or not being completed by a certain concrete date, then do not use pro bono to fill that need. So pro bono is an amazing resource for many reasons, but you have to remember that these volunteers are people who are balancing many things. They may be working a full-time job. They may be parents or caretakers. Life can get in the way. And so pro bono projects do typically take place on a bit of a slower timetable than a project that you would be handling in-house or a project that you have with a paid contractor where there's legalese behind, I have to have this thing by a certain date, right? That's not going to exist on the pro bono basis. So if you have an absolute deadline and it's coming up very quickly, and it would be very, very bad if it wasn't completed 100% by that date, then I would cross it off your list and find another resource to tackle that project with. However, if your timeline has some flexibility or it's not until the second half of this year, then it would absolutely pass the urgency test and could be a good fit for pro bono resources to fulfill for you. The next test I want to talk about here is called knowledge transfer. Are you confident that you and your fellow team members can and will transfer the information and materials to the volunteer that they're going to need to complete this project successfully? So to put this test into context, a form of pro bono that might need the least amount of knowledge transfer would be if you brought in a photographer to a fundraiser or a programmatic event that you were hosting. And you said, I broadly want to capture this story or images that tell this narrative. You're still giving the photographer, the videographer a viewpoint in which you want your organization to be captured. However, it's certainly not the same as if you brought in a marketer who could help you create an email marketing strategy. You can't exactly point to a computer and tell that volunteer, all right, go draft me a strategy. I want templates. I want best practices. I want it all. There's going to need to be a good amount of information exchanged with that individual so that they have previous examples to lean on, or they know the audience members that your email lists are going out to, the audience members you wish your emails were going out to, your goals when it comes to who you want your audience to be made up of, or what the growth you want your list size to see. So there needs to be a good amount of information and feedback exchange throughout. So I would suggest that you really carefully examine, am I ready to exchange that information? Do I have what this volunteer is going to need to be successful in their work? Because if the answer is no, then that might be another pro bono project you need to do first, right? If you're, instead of tackling an email marketing strategy, if you're realizing that you don't even know the core goals of what you're trying to accomplish through email, that might be a sign where you should backtrack and connect with someone who can help you shape a marketing plan for the year instead. And so then email can be a piece of that overarching story that you're hoping to tell through your marketing efforts. So when you look at your list of marketing needs that you're considering pro bono for, are you confident that you can and will transfer the required information remotely? Are you going to rely on board members, team members? How is that process going to play out in a virtual environment? And that actually brings us to our last screening test, which is called board and staff readiness. So does your organization really want this project to happen? Or is it just you that wants this project to happen? And this is a really, really critical question for you to ask yourself, because several folks from around your organization may need to be involved in order to make a project a success. If you, as an executive director, think that crowdfunding could be a great area to lean into through social media in the year ahead, but your marketing director doesn't think that it's a priority, that's a red flag. Choose to invest time planning for and managing pro bono that has buy-in around your organization. That way you can ensure successful implementation of what you and your volunteer partner create. Because really the worst possible scenario is that a volunteer comes in, creates this beautiful outcome or product and deliverable for you. They pour their heart and their soul into sharing this expertise with you and your team. And then it sits on a shelf because you didn't have the buy-in you needed internally to actually implement that piece successfully. And so then the volunteer never gets to feel that sense of being able to create an actual impact with you and your team, and the time that you spent managing that volunteer and working together on this project could have been spent on something even more impactful. So definitely keep this in mind. And I would call out here as well that Taproot actually completed a study with the chief executives for corporate purpose, originally in 2015, and then we refreshed the data again in 2019, determining the average value of an hour of pro bono service. And we found that on average, it's $195 per hour. So Taproot's typical average pro bono project takes around 30 hours of volunteer time to complete, with the volunteer sharing around 3 to 5 hours of their time per week. So this means that your nonprofit is looking at donated services right around $6,000 per pro bono project that you request and get matched with a volunteer for. So throughout this webinar today, and as you're thinking through in the weeks going forward what you could use pro bono for, when we say that this is a really valuable tool, we really, really mean it. By infusing use of pro bono support throughout your departments, marketing and beyond, you can save money on your bottom line while building capacity and longer term stability. And because it's such a valuable resource, you do need to put that time and energy into planning for how you're going to make the most of that value, right? And you're already a step ahead because you're in this event today. You're thinking through these 4 tests for great pro bono. But we just challenge you to keep these in mind going forward, so that you can continue to make the most of resources like this that Taproot offers, or other organizations out there who are offering great resources as well. So with that in mind, now that you're fully stocked up on pro bono best practices and you have some ideas hopefully percolating on what marketing or communications pro bono could look like at your organization, I'm so pleased to be joined by a wonderful Taproot marketing volunteer. Her name is Samantha O'Neill. Samantha has been a dedicated pro bono consultant for years now and has worked with nonprofit organizations on a very wide range of communications and PR and marketing research and social media projects, as well as consultations. So I encourage you all to join me in welcoming Samantha. I'm going to go ahead and switch us over so you can just see our faces, because we're going to be chatting about tips and experiences. Thanks so much for hopping on, Samantha.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Samantha, I would love to kick things off by just having you briefly introduce yourself and the marketing superpowers that you've shared with nonprofits over the years.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in PR for 15 years. I started in Los Angeles. I worked for a public affairs firm that did issue campaigns, a lot of healthcare work. So things like Cover the Uninsured Week and the national launch of Medicare Part D. And then I moved east to Washington, D.C. I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs and also the Department of Commerce. I've also worked for a nonprofit. So I've been on the nonprofit side serving veterans. And I've been on my own as a freelance communicator for 5 years. And I think I've been volunteering with Taproot for 5 years as well. So I've done in-person events pre-COVID, and I've done a lot of full-day events online, and then some of the longer projects as well. So it's been a great way to work with lots of different nonprofits from all over the country and all types of different fields as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. And yes, can attest from looking at Samantha's volunteer resume with Taproot that she has truly engaged in, I think, every single one of our program offerings. So we're so happy to have you on the line today and are looking forward to learning from your experience. So to that effect, I would love if you could share an example of a project or consultation that you completed with a nonprofit, and maybe something that you learned from the nonprofit during the course of that project, or that they were able to learn from you. Take us through that journey.
Sure, that's a good question. So one of the things that I've done more than once with Taproot is an all-day project. I think I've done 2 or 3 online, unfortunately. I think the first one was supposed to be in person, and then we moved it online at the start of COVID shutdowns. And this is interesting because it brings together a group of volunteers who have never met each other before. And Taproot does a really good job of connecting people with different types of backgrounds. And then you get a nonprofit and probably a week or 2 in advance, so you can do some research. What their goal is for the day of pro bono work. So you come with, some background research and some ideas, but then you really do the meat of the work all day in a work session. And I worked with a nonprofit that was local to where I lived in DC, which was, just happened to happen that way because I had people on my team that were not local who were volunteers. Yeah. And they were launching an in-person road tour. It was STEM related and education related. And they were looking to raise money to purchase this road tour vehicle that they were going to use in the DC area to bring STEM to schools that were underserved. So the things that made it a good project for me versus other ones that I've worked on is that it had a concrete goal. They had a deadline. It wasn't, help us launch our idea for a nonprofit. It wasn't, help us improve our, online presence or help us launch social media is kind of broad, right? It was like very specific, and it was long term. I mean, they were looking like a year and a half out. So if we want to purchase and deck out this sciencey vehicle in time for school to start in a year and a half from now, and I had finance people on my team and strategy people, and I was just the marketing person. What's the fundraising strategy that we have to use to get to this point, and what's the timeline? And then for me, it was what are the marketing strategies and tools and messages that we can use to get out that fundraising. But it was really, really concrete, and they had in their mind a timeline, and then we could work back from that, which was what made it really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice to call out, especially for any folks on the line who are considering, well, my nonprofit is a little newer. I don't have a strategic plan, or I don't have a marketing plan or strategy in mind, or a business development / fundraising strategy. A volunteer is not necessarily going to be able to step into your organization and say, all right, this is how you should raise money, or this is how you should market yourself. They'll be able to come in and offer an expert third-party opinion about how you can shape and frame things, and then how the execution of those pieces can look. They might even be able to assist with that execution, but you need to have some structured ideas and vision for what you want these pieces to look like. So really, really good thought to keep in mind. And I think that ties back into that scope test we were talking about earlier when we were going through the 4 questions to ask yourself. Do you have a clear end goal in mind for this project you want to complete with a volunteer? So Samantha, I'm curious, that was a good example. Maybe has there been an experience that didn't go so well, that maybe the nonprofit wasn't prepared, or communications barriers? I'm curious to hear about the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example of, so I did one of the longer matches where, I applied online through the same system that you're going to show people today, and was matched with someone. And they kind of brought like that broader goal, like, we want you to help us launch social media, which, as a consultant is like a terrifying thing to be asked, right? Because it's just overwhelming, right? I mean, that could be a million different things and a million different, timetables. But, so we worked together to redefine that and to shorten that together. And we ended up, finding an event that they had in 6 weeks. And they wanted to get more people to attend that event. And we talked about how we could use social media to get people to that event. And then once they got there, to engage those people more fully at the event. It was a piano lessons for underserved kids in, I think, New York City. And it was like free or reduced, music lessons. So this was a recital. So there were going to be people from all over New York coming. And it was going to be parents and kids and brothers and sisters and stuff. Like, how do you engage people and get them to learn more about the program? And then also why, music education is so important and stuff like that. And, using social media and getting people to engage with your brand and getting them to post online while they're there and answer questions and do a challenge. I mean, that's all fantastic, things that social media can be used for. Yeah. And then once you give someone like me a very specific goal, like, we want more people to come, people to be more engaged while they're there, and then people who can't come to be engaged online. That's something we can work with. Just like, help me improve my website is not enough.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Tangible examples of what you're hoping to achieve by using this marketing channel or by using this technique. I've actually, I volunteered through Taproot's programs as well, so I can kind of see both sides of the experience. And I've worked on a social media strategy project with a nonprofit who was a startup launching their social media channels. And when I asked, what are you hoping to gain from this project? What are your goals? And their primary goal was to go viral. They wanted a tweet to go viral. And to me, as a consultant coming in, it's not exactly setting someone up for success. So think about, okay, what would going viral look like for you? What message are you even hoping reaches thousands of people worldwide? What are you trying to get out there? Who is the type of audience you're trying to reach? What action are you trying to move them to? Those are the pieces that once we get more nitty-gritty into those questions, then we can help shape whether it's social media or email or your website and beyond. That's where more productive work is going to happen with these pro bono consultants. So I love that you called that out. I'm curious, as you're scrolling through opportunities, volunteer opportunities on Taproot Plus, or you receive the prompts through email, is there a type of opportunity that jumps out to you? Maybe because a nonprofit has included something in the project description that really jumps out to you or resonates with you. What are you looking for?
In addition to the concrete and measurable goals, and I think that's super important just because think of like pro bono people are volunteering, not for the overall goal of volunteering a certain amount of hours a month, right? I think we just tend to be, very goal oriented people who are volunteering because we want to make an impact. And that's why if we see something that's concrete that we think that we can be successful at, we're much more apt to say yes to that project. But I also think any organization that, as a marketing person, any organization that shows to me that they're unique, right? Because, there's a million organizations out there that are working on healthcare or education or, a lot of things that are in my area of expertise or interest. So if they're looking at it from a unique way, it shows me that they already know how to uniquely tell their story. So not only is it exciting for me to be able to work on an issue I care about in a unique way, but it makes me as a marketing person think that they get it and that they'll be more fun to work with, and I'll be more successful working with them if I already see that they use marketing successfully to tell a unique story about themselves.
Yeah, I love that. I have one last question for you. And then I'll run through Taproot's programs a little bit more. And then I'd love for you to stick around for Q&A because I see we've got some great questions coming in from folks on the line. So my last question for you during this segment is, are there any types of knowledge transfer? We talked about that as part of our 4 tests for great pro bono. Nonprofits need to be ready to hand over materials or information or be standing by for feedback during the project. Is there any type of knowledge transfer where you've seen it's kind of a recurring item nonprofits just need to have ready to go to hand over to a marketing volunteer like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that's most interesting and important to me is to have staff people from all different levels of your organization available and part of the process, right? So, I need to talk to the person in the trenches who's going to be most impacted by this product that I'm creating, and also who's going to use that product, as well as just, the high level people that maybe have all the background information that I need to create it. And then also examples of things, not only things that work, but things that didn't work. So if you can show me like we've done this and it hasn't worked, then I'm starting from somewhere and I can maybe help you improve that, as well as create stuff that's going to be different to try something new. And then lastly, it's just a shareable folder. I mean, technology is so, cheap and easy to use now. So if you come to the day of volunteering, you already have a shareable folder with, your data, your research, your graphics, some examples from competitors or from yourself, then we don't have to waste time, going and looking for that stuff. And your pro bono volunteers are definitely going to ask you for stuff you didn't think of that you have to go and find. But if you can start with that concrete availability and even share it a couple of weeks before so we can look at it, that's a great way to jumpstart it.
I think that's great. Something as simple as a shared Google Drive that you and your volunteer can work out of is so important. And I know we have folks on the line who mentioned that they're startup organizations, which is why I try and keep mentioning examples for those folks. If you're a startup and don't have any past examples of copy or messaging that you really like yet, I would say start saving inspiration from other mailing lists that you're on, other websites that you really love, take some screen grabs and create an inspiration folder for yourself or a volunteer. And that'll give you some at least starting materials to work from. All right. So with that said, thank you so much, Samantha. I have already seen comments coming to the chat talking about how helpful your commentary has been. I'm going to ask, mute yourself for just the next couple of minutes, and then we'll loop back to Q&A in case we have folks on the line who still have questions for you. But thank you so much for what you've shared so far. We really appreciate it. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and jump back in really quickly. I want to go over how you can actually connect with skilled volunteers. Just spend a couple of minutes walking through the Taproot site because I know I have seen a good amount of questions come through on just how the logistics work, how this actually plays out. So on that note, I want to introduce you to Taproot Plus. So Taproot Plus is a completely cost-free nonprofit and volunteer matching platform. We designed this online space to be really flexible and nimble so that any nonprofit, regardless of how long you've been around for, how many staff members you have, how many staff members you don't have, if you're a volunteer-run organization, no matter what your budget size is, you have access to skilled volunteer resources. So Taproot, this is our way of scaling up the accessibility of support and making sure that all those who want to use Pro Bono and have a need for this type of support have a way to access it from the safety of their own homes, since this, by and large, is a virtual experience. So currently, Taproot Plus is open to registered nonprofits, public schools, fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the US, the UK, the European Union, Canada, and India, and has over 100,000 total users. We also have certain select services open to small businesses. I'm not going to be covering that during today's presentation, but if you're interested in small business information, just drop a note in the chat and we'll have a team member follow up with you. So I also want to mention, because I believe I saw a few questions come in on this, there's no limit to the number of staff members at your organization who can have an account on Taproot Plus. So this is really important to keep in mind, because later today, when our team sends out the recording of this event, please feel free to forward it to a colleague who might benefit from working with virtual volunteers. We've talked a lot today about marketing support specifically, but you can work on a social media project with someone as a colleague, or a board member is working with an HR professional who's revamping your employee handbook, for example. So again, there really is no financial fee for using Taproot Plus or our resources. The fee is really in form of time and energy that it takes to carefully plan for and then manage projects with volunteers like Samantha. So definitely keep in mind that time and energy cost. So to get started, it's super simple. Pull up a browser and head to taprootplus.org. I think if one of my colleagues could drop that link in the chat, or even make it available in a banner on the screen, that would be fantastic, so folks can easily click into that. Make sure you have your EIN handy, because that's what we'll use to verify that you are in fact a nonprofit or a charitable organization. And use an email that you check regularly. Taproot Plus alerts run through email, so you want that to be an inbox that you do check consistently. And then when it comes to requesting volunteer support, you really have two core options. One is a one-time, 1-hour consultation session, and the other is a more in-depth project. So first, really quickly, a consultation is a really great option if you're stuck or maybe aren't sure what project you might need, or what you need to have planned for a volunteer who's tackling a longer-term project. This is a great way to use a session. You can brainstorm with a professional, you can get neutral feedback on something, you can get quick answers on a specific question. I know myself and my Taproot colleagues, we're a nonprofit ourselves. I know I mentioned that earlier. So we use Taproot Plus to find volunteers to help our own organization. And I've used sessions personally to get ideas for volunteer retention and like development ideas. How can we provide more value to our volunteers? So I've connected with HR experts for that. I know I've had a colleague who's connected with Salesforce experts to answer quick questions about our CRM. We don't have a paid Salesforce person on staff, so this is a great way we can build our capacity and get quick answers on that side of the house. So that's the sessions option. And then, of course, we have a project option, which is for those more in-depth, I want to walk away from this multi-week project having accomplished an updated HR policy or a tech assessment for taking programs online, or 10 design social media graphics, or a business development strategy focused on how I'm going to get sponsorships from local businesses. So something really specific, end goal, that can be wrapped up in a matter of 2 to 9 weeks in duration. Remember, your volunteers sharing around 3 to 5 hours of their time with you each week. So as you're posting project requests, I would keep in mind some of the things Samantha called out earlier. First of all, being clear and specific with what you want to leave the project having accomplished. So this helps volunteer applicants know if they're going to be the right fit for you and your need. Number 2, show passion and excitement for the work your volunteer partner is going to be completing for you. What does this project mean for your mission and the community members that you're serving? Potential volunteers, they want to make a difference. That's why they're on Taproot Plus. That's why they're so generously sharing their time and talents with you. So let them know what they're supporting. What's that end goal in mind that your organization is working towards, and how are they going to play a role in helping accomplish that? And then number 3, demonstrate readiness. How are you going to implement this project that the volunteer completes for you? Make sure to be transparent with your plans. And then just really quickly, every project request that's submitted is reviewed by Taproot staff members. Megan, one of our staff members on the line today, is actually one of the folks who does those reviews. You may have already interacted with her at the help desk. So even though this is a virtual online site, we do have real human beings behind it, and we are here every step of the way. If you do have any questions about using the platform, getting connected with volunteers, or managing a volunteer once you are connected with them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into questions. So please give me one moment as I scroll through and organize my thoughts so we can tackle these one at a time. So Samantha, I actually noticed one for you right off the bat. So we have a nonprofit who sent in a question basically saying they have 0 marketing experience. And so they're curious what marketing objective, what clear and concrete deliverable they could even come to a volunteer with first. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, tell me if you think that this is incorrect, but I think that's a great way to do that small consult, right? Because I would love to get on, the phone or, video with an organization like that. That's like, help us, right? So instead of setting up like a 6-week long project, just, ask for help, right? Say who you are, who you impact, maybe 1 or 2 successes from last year and 1 or 2 things you wish you could do better. And then just say, help, what do you think a marketing professional could do? And it would be really fun for someone like me to help you set up a project, and then you can go out and try to get other people to bid on it.
That is a great idea. And I think the perfect use for those consultation sessions that we were talking about. That's where you can come to the table and say, look, I don't even know where to start. Like, help me, brainstorm with me. And you can hold those sessions with multiple volunteers too, right? So if you're in the midst of marketing strategy and planning and you're not even sure where to begin, have 2 or 3 conversations with different volunteers, and each of their perspectives might give you a clear sense of, after talking with these folks, email is really where I need to focus in on. So that's what I'm going to prioritize for my first longer term pro bono project. And here's what those volunteers told me I need to have ready so I can complete that email project successfully. Here are the knowledge transfer materials I need to have ready, or the goals I need to have in mind. So I think that's great advice. So I see I see 2 questions that just came in. I can answer those quickly. Does Taproot work with churches that are socially engaged in issues? So Taproot is able to work with religiously based organizations if the program that we're supporting or our volunteers are supporting is non-proselytizing, like non-denominational in nature. So for instance, if a church or a synagogue is providing a food pantry that is open to all and it's not specifically advocating one religion over the other. Same thing goes for political candidates or governmental groups as well. If an organization is advocating for one candidate over another, that's where our programs can't support. So same thing on the religious side. So hopefully that answers that question. How often can you engage in those 1-hour sessions? No limit. So there's no limit to the number of requests that you can put in for sessions or projects. The only limit is going to be how many of those you can effectively manage at one time. So for instance, a social media copywriting project, maybe you work with a volunteer to draft 10 different social media posts for you. That might only take 3 to 4 weeks to complete, maybe 30 minutes to an hour of your time each week to manage and to give feedback. So that could be a relatively easy project to manage on top of requesting something else, right? Working with a graphic designer, for instance, or doing multiple sessions with folks. However, if you're working more in depth with someone like an HR or strategy professional, and you're meeting with them multiple times a week, it might be very difficult for you to put the required time and energy necessary into managing 2 or 3 pro bono projects at once. One might be your limit there. So think critically about how much project management space you have before putting these requests in for volunteers. Because the worst thing is leaving a volunteer hanging once they've signed on to do work with you, and then you can't be responsive or share the feedback that that volunteer needs to do the work successfully. And then another quick question, can we work with organizations that have fiscal sponsors? Yes. Yep. So you'll have to share your fiscal sponsorship paperwork with us, but that is completely fine. And then can we work with nonprofits in the process of gaining 501c3 status? We do require that you have your 501c3 status before beginning work with us. And that's for the benefit of our volunteers, so we can ensure that their time and energy and talents are going towards a registered charitable organization. All right, I'm revisiting the list. And Samantha, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. We have someone interested. It was actually a few people had chimed in around planned giving or just individual giving in general, fundraising in general. Would a volunteer be able to provide advice around that? Because it is a very specific nonprofit challenge. So you coming from the business world, although I know you do have nonprofit experience as well, how do you think your skills would be able to translate there?
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's you would use the same communications and marketing strategies to try to get the word out about planned giving as you would for, anything else. So again, like my experience was in public affairs campaigns where I was trying to change behavior, but we would be using the same to change, your behavior into trying to give.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a freelancer, I see nonprofits coming for help around like November, December every year. And these are paid that I work with. So I think that everyone has that challenge. And one thing that makes it so challenging is because so many people have the same goal and are trying to use this at the same time. So
yeah,
one of the things is like, do you absolutely have to do it around this time of year? I understand why you want to, but realize that all your competitors are doing it.
I think that's really, really good thing to call out. Oh, I'm so sorry, Samantha, you were breaking up a little bit on my end, so I think I spoke over you. So apologies for that. I was just saying, I think that's really good advice. So we were addressing earlier, this is a really crowded marketing space right now. Everybody's emails, their social media, it's cluttered. So when you're thinking through how you can break through the noise, changing up your annual giving to maybe putting that out a different time of year, or your planned giving campaigns, Maybe instead of running Giving Tuesday, you participate in a statewide. I know Arizona Gives Day is coming up very soon in March versus Giving Tuesday in November, which ends up being a lot more competition. So think critically about the timing of these campaigns, and that can help you break through the noise a little bit more. So I see a question, and I do know we're a minute over. I can hang around and answer a few other questions, but I do want to acknowledge if people have to jump off the line, totally fine. We so appreciate you taking the time to join the event today, and we will be sending out the recording later this afternoon. So please stay tuned for that. And I'll around to continue answering these questions. I've also put up Taproot's email address on this slide in case you'd like to connect with us via email afterwards. So going back to this list of questions I have here, what's the average timeline for a single project? Again, average 30 full hours of volunteer time, around 3 to 5 hours per week. Although this will depend on the volunteer. We have some volunteers in our network who are retirees who just want to knock it out in a week. They just want to get in there and go. And we have some volunteers who maybe they have a family obligation or they're taking a vacation. And so they can say, I can give you 5 hours this week, but then I can only give you 1 hour the following 2 weeks, but I can jump back in and give you another 5 after that. So it depends on the individual. Work it out with your volunteer during a kickoff call when you first start the project together, where you establish communications preferences, timeline, milestone goals, establish that cadence of work time as well with them, so you know what to expect. I see a question around, can we connect with Samantha? We will share. Samantha has been generous enough to share her LinkedIn information with us. So we will send that out to attendees so you are able to connect with her after the session. And then I see another question here around, can Taproot find someone that help with press releases? Yes, although that is a project, I would recommend having some examples to share with your volunteer in terms of what you want the tone of your press release to look and feel like, or at least some inspiration in mind. So again, follow newsletter lists from other organizations, take screenshots, start an inspo folder so you can have those materials ready to go. So how does Taproot match pro bono volunteers with nonprofit requirements? So we have a pool, a community of volunteers like Samantha, like other folks on the line who've been chiming in the chat, who have indicated skill sets that they'd be willing to share with nonprofits. We do ask that all volunteers have at least 3 years of professional experience in whatever skill set they're donating. And that way the nonprofit won't be responsible for training or educating a volunteer on a specific skill. I mean, I was just speaking earlier about Taproot doesn't have a Salesforce expert on staff. So if we put out a Salesforce project and brought in a volunteer, it would be impossible for us to train that volunteer on Salesforce, right? We're looking to them to come in with that expertise already. So that's why we have that professional experience requirement. And so we'll send out, when your project request is reviewed by Taproot staff members and then published to our live marketplace, we will also boost out your project to volunteers in our community who have the right skill sets because it could be a match. So when a volunteer applies, you'll get to see their resume, their LinkedIn profile if they've chosen to connect it, and an online portfolio if applicable for things like design projects. And then you'll get to decide if you want to move forward with an interview with that person, or if you'd like to decline them and continue looking. All right. Still scrolling through. How long does it take once a project has been submitted? It truly varies on the project that has been requested. As I mentioned earlier, some of those data projects that we talked about on an earlier slide, like setting up a Google Analytics backend, that might only take a volunteer 2-3 weeks maybe to knock out. However, some of those other projects we talked about under data, like creating key performance indicators, that's a very strategic decision for your organization to make. What are those goals that we're looking to set for ourselves and indicators that our work is successful? So that project might take on upwards of 8 or 9 weeks, because you'll need to pull in board members or other leaders from around your organization to fully implement or execute that project. So it is a range. I know that's not a very good specific answer for you, but it truly is a range because Taproot allows customizable engagements. All right. So I do see questions continue to come in. I want to be cognizant of people's time. So if you've submitted a question and it hasn't been answered, no worries. We have a log of this chat, and we will follow up with you one-on-one after the event today through email to make sure that your question gets answered. So like we mentioned earlier, stay tuned to that inbox. We'll send out a recording, and we will follow up with the people who had open questions. And we'll also include Samantha's LinkedIn information, so you can build your networks as well. But with that, I want to say thank you again to Samantha for joining us and sharing such insight into the world of marketing, volunteering, and I know it was so valuable for our nonprofit partners. So thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thanks so much, everyone who joined us on the line today. We're looking forward to following up through email, and let's keep the conversation going. So you'll have our direct contact information after this. And so if any other questions pop up, be sure to let us know. We're looking forward to working together on Taproot Plus and beyond. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.